Security cameras don't lie. November 14th, 2019, 11:47 p.m. A woman in a yellow dress falls backward at a charity gala. Blood spreads across white marble. And the man in the tuxedo, her husband, the millionaire everyone admired. He doesn't rush to help. He doesn't call for an ambulance. He throws his head back and laughs. Within minutes, FBI agents storm through those gilded doors. Handcuffs click shut. Cameras flash. The video goes viral. But that's just where the story starts. Because what happened next? The courtroom battles, the impossible choices, the price of choosing truth over $5 million in silence money, that's the part nobody saw coming. Stay with me, because this isn't a story about revenge. It's about what happens when survival costs everything you have, and you pay it anyway. This is the true story of Rebecca Hart and the chair that changed everything. The security camera footage would later become the most watched video in America. Timestamp, November 14th, 2019, 11:47 p.m. Location, Waldorf Astoria Ballroom, Manhattan. A woman in a yellow gown falls backward, her arms reaching instinctively toward her pregnant belly. Blood spreads across white marble in a pattern that looks almost artistic under the chandelier light. A man in a tuxedo stands 3 feet away, his head thrown back, laughing. Then the sirens. Red and blue lights flood through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the elegant ballroom into a crime scene. The camera captures the exact moment when handcuffs click shut around his wrists, when his smile finally dies. But that's the ending. The real story started 6 months earlier, in a moment that felt like salvation, but was actually the beginning of everything falling apart. Rebecca Hart stood in the lobby of Cleveland General Hospital, staring at her phone screen. The voicemail from the bank had played 3 times now, but the words still didn't make sense. "Miss Hart, this is Sandra from Citizens Bank. Your account has been credited $340,000. If you have questions about this transaction, please contact us immediately." $340,000, the exact amount of her mother's medical debt. The debt that had forced Rebecca to sell the family home, declare bankruptcy, and spend the last 2 years sleeping on a friend's couch while working 60-hour weeks at a women's shelter. Her hands shook as she called the bank back. "There must be a mistake," she said when Sandra answered. "No mistake, Miss Hart. The payment came from an anonymous donor through a charitable trust. It's legitimate." Rebecca ended the call and sat down on the nearest bench. Her mother had died 3 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, diagnosed too late. The bills had arrived like a second death. Each envelope another reminder that even dying cost more than most people could afford. Someone had paid it all, every cent. She spent the next week trying to find out who. The bank wouldn't say. The charitable trust was registered in Delaware, protected by layers of legal privacy. She hired a lawyer with the last of her savings, but even he couldn't break through. Then, 2 weeks later, she was setting up for the annual Hope Foundation Gala when he walked in. Grant Hayes. She'd seen his photo in the event program. Major donor, tech billionaire, 41 years old, net worth estimated at $340 million. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, and he moved through the half-decorated ballroom like he owned it, which technically he kind of did. His company had sponsored the event. "Rebecca Hart?" He extended his hand. "I'm Grant Hayes." She shook it, confused. "How do you know my name?" "I read the staff list. You're the coordinator for this event, right? I wanted to thank you personally. The work you do here matters." There was something in the way he said it. Not the usual wealthy donor condescension. He actually seemed to mean it. They talked for 20 minutes. He asked about her work at the women's shelter, about the programs they ran, about the women they helped. He didn't talk about himself at all. When he left, Rebecca thought that was the end of it. 3 days later, he called her. "I hope this isn't inappropriate," he said, "but I wondered if you'd have dinner with me, not as a donor, as someone who'd like to know you better." Rebecca said yes because she was lonely, and because he seemed kind, and because for the first time in 2 years, someone was asking about her life instead of her mother's death or her financial disaster. The dinner lasted 4 hours. He told her about growing up in Seattle, about losing his mother young, about building his company from nothing. She told him about Cleveland, about wanting to help people, about the weight of watching someone you love die slowly. At the end of the night, he drove her home and didn't try to kiss her. He just said, "I'd like to see you again." A week later, she found out the truth. They were having coffee when her lawyer called. He'd finally traced the anonymous payment. It came from a trust controlled by Grant Michael Hayes, her lawyer said. He paid off your mother's medical debt. Rebecca sat very still. Across the table, Grant watched her face change. "You knew I'd find out eventually," she said after she hung up. "I hoped you would." He leaned forward. "I didn't tell you because I wanted you to get to know me first. Not the guy with money. Just me." "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "Because you spend your life helping people who have nothing. Because when I read about your mother, I thought about mine. Because I could afford to help, so I did." He paused. "And maybe because I wanted an excuse to meet you." It should have felt manipulative. It should have raised every red flag, but Rebecca had been drowning for so long that when someone threw her a lifeline, she didn't ask why. She just grabbed on. They dated for 3 months. He was patient, attentive, romantic in ways that felt genuine. He never pressured her. He seemed to understand her grief, her exhaustion, her fear of ever trusting anyone again. When he proposed at Christmas, surrounded by her friends at a restaurant she'd mentioned loving, she said yes because saying no felt impossible. How do you reject someone who saved you? They married in March. Small ceremony, just close friends. She wore a simple white dress. He cried during his vows. Everyone said they'd never seen him so happy. She moved into his penthouse overlooking Central Park. She quit her job at the women's shelter because he said she deserved to rest, to heal, to focus on herself for once. By April, she was pregnant. Her first viable pregnancy after 3 miscarriages. The doctor said her chances of carrying to term were slim, but she made it past 12 weeks, then 16, then 20. At 6 months, she started noticing the cracks. Grant was different at home. Still charming in public, but cold when they were alone. He controlled the finances completely. Her name wasn't on any accounts. He made small, cruel comments disguised as concern. "You're lucky I took you on," he said once when she asked about opening a joint account. Most men wouldn't want damaged goods. When she found another woman's lipstick in his car, he made her feel crazy for asking about it. "It's from a business dinner." "You're being paranoid. Is this what pregnancy hormones do?" She backed down because she had nowhere to go. No money, no home, and a baby who depended on him as much as she did. Then came the gala. Grant insisted she attend even though she was exhausted, swollen, uncomfortable at 6 months pregnant. He'd planned the Hayes Technologies annual charity event for weeks. 400 guests at $50,000 per table. "Smile," he told her that morning. "Look happy. Don't embarrass me." She wore a light yellow gown because it was her mother's favorite color. A small rebellion, the only one she had left. She sat alone at the VIP table while Grant worked the room, shaking hands, posing for photos, playing the role of generous billionaire. She watched him laugh with strangers and wondered when he'd stop laughing with her. That's when the woman in red walked in. Elena Ross was stunning. Red satin gown, dark hair pinned up, moving through the ballroom like she owned it. She scanned the crowd, found Grant, and her expression shifted. Betrayal mixed with rage, mixed with something else. Hope, maybe. Or the death of it. Elena walked straight to Rebecca's table. "You must be Rebecca," she said. Her voice shook slightly. "Yes," Rebecca tried to smile. "Are you with the event staff?" "No, I'm someone your husband knows very well." The words landed like a physical blow. Rebecca's stomach, already tight with the baby's weight, clenched harder. "I don't understand," Rebecca said. "He told me he was leaving you, tonight. He said you were just a business arrangement." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "He said we'd be together." Grant appeared then, grabbing Elena's arm. "Let's talk outside." But Elena pulled away. Her voice rose, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "No, tell her. Tell her you've been sleeping with me for 2 months. Tell her about the promises you made." Heads turned. Conversations stopped. The orchestra kept playing, but it felt like the wrong soundtrack. Grant pulled Elena aside. Rebecca couldn't hear what he whispered, but she saw Elena's face change. Confusion first, then understanding, then pure fury. Elena returned to the table. When she spoke, her voice was ice. You don't deserve him. Rebecca looked up at this stranger, this woman her husband had been lying to, and said the truest thing she'd said in months. I don't even want him. What happened next took 3 seconds, but would replay in Rebecca's mind for years. Elena's heel swung forward in a sharp, deliberate arc. It connected with the base of Rebecca's chair. The chair tipped. Rebecca fell backward, her body twisting instinctively to protect her belly. Her head hit the marble floor with a sound like a branch snapping. Blood pooled beneath her yellow dress. The ballroom went silent. 300 people frozen in a tableau of shock. Grant looked down at his wife bleeding on the floor. He threw his head back and laughed. Not nervous laughter, not shock, genuine amusement. Jesus Christ, Rebecca, he said. You always know how to make a scene. Then he turned and walked toward the bar. That's when Martha Green, the event manager who'd been adjusting floral arrangements, pulled out her phone and started recording. Rebecca woke to white lights and the smell of antiseptic. Her head throbbed. Her belly felt wrong. Too light, too empty. Miss Hart? A woman's voice, professional and kind. I'm Dr. Lisa Bennett. You're at Manhattan General. Do you remember what happened? Rebecca tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. The doctor held a cup of water to her lips. The baby, Rebecca managed. Your daughter is alive. She's in the NICU. You had a placental abruption. The fall separated the placenta from your uterus. We had to do an emergency cesarean section. You were 28 weeks along. Too early. Rebecca's vision blurred with tears. It's too early. She's a fighter, 2 pounds, 3 ounces, breathing on her own with assistance. The next 72 hours are critical, but her vitals are stable. Relief hit so hard Rebecca couldn't breathe. Her daughter was alive, premature, fragile, but alive. Dr. Bennett sat down in the chair beside the bed. Rebecca, there's something else. During the surgery, we found a mass on your left ovary. We had to biopsy it. The relief drained away. It's ovarian cancer, stage 3, advanced. The words didn't make sense at first. Cancer. Stage 3, advanced. How long? Rebecca whispered. We can't be certain, but likely a year, maybe longer. The pregnancy masked the symptoms, the bloating, the fatigue, the pain. We attributed everything to normal pregnancy discomfort. So falling saved my life. In a way, yes, the assault forced early detection. Without it, we might not have found it until stage 4. Rebecca started laughing. It hurt. Everything hurt. But she couldn't stop. The irony was too perfect. The man who tried to destroy her had accidentally saved her. And now she'd have to fight cancer to stay alive long enough to raise a daughter she hadn't even held yet. What happens now? She asked when the laughter turned to tears. Chemotherapy, 6 rounds, starting in 2 weeks. It will make you very weak. You won't be able to care for a newborn during treatment. I don't have anyone. The words came out flat. My mother's dead. My father and I haven't spoken in 5 years. I have no family. Dr. Bennett was quiet for a moment. Social services will visit tomorrow. They'll help you figure out temporary care arrangements. Grant's in jail, right? They arrested him? He was arrested at the scene, but I don't know his current status. Rebecca closed her eyes. Her husband had orchestrated an assault on her while she was pregnant. She'd watched him laugh while she bled, and now she was fighting for her life while her daughter, fought for hers in an incubator somewhere in this hospital. Can I see her? Rebecca asked. Soon. You need to rest first. But Rebecca couldn't rest. She lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, counting her heartbeats. Somewhere in this building, her daughter was doing the same thing. Both of them fighting to survive the same man's cruelty. The social worker arrived the next afternoon. Linda Martinez, 50-ish, with tired eyes and a gentle voice that probably soothed a lot of people. It didn't soothe Rebecca. Miss Hart, I'm here to discuss care arrangements for your daughter during your medical treatment. Her name is Grace, Rebecca said, and I'll take care of her. I understand, but chemotherapy is extremely debilitating. You'll need help. Then I'll hire someone. Linda consulted her tablet. Your financial records show no income for the past 6 months. Your husband's assets have been frozen pending the federal investigation. Do you have access to any funds? No. Family who can help? No. Miss Hart, if you cannot provide stable housing and adequate caregiving during your treatment, we may need to place Grace in temporary foster care. The words hit like another fall. Foster care. They wanted to take her daughter. Her father tried to kill us, Rebecca said. He orchestrated the assault. He's in jail. He's been charged, not convicted. Legally, there's still a presumption of innocence. And even if he's convicted, that doesn't solve the immediate care issue. You'll be undergoing chemotherapy. You'll need somewhere to live, income for medical bills, and basic necessities. So you're saying if I'm too poor and too sick, you will take my daughter away? Linda's expression softened with genuine sympathy. I'm saying we need to ensure Grace has adequate care. That's my only concern. Let me help you figure this out. But there was nothing to figure out. Rebecca had no money, no home, no family, and cancer. The math was simple and devastating. That night, after Linda left, Rebecca finally got to see Grace. The NICU was a forest of machines and tubes, tiny babies in plastic boxes, fighting battles they didn't understand. Grace was in the corner, under warming lights, with wires monitoring her heart rate, her oxygen, her impossibly small existence. A nurse helped Rebecca into a chair beside the incubator. You can touch her through the ports, the nurse said gently. She knows your voice. Talk to her. Rebecca slid her hands through the openings and touched her daughter for the first time. Grace was so small. Her skin was translucent, her fingers the size of matches. But she was perfect. Hi, baby girl, Rebecca whispered. I'm your mama. I'm sorry about all this. I'm sorry you had to come out so early, but you're going to be okay. We both are, I promise. Grace's tiny hand curled around Rebecca's finger. Rebecca sat there for an hour just holding her daughter's hand, making promises she didn't know how to keep. Grant's bail hearing happened while Rebecca was still in the hospital. She watched it on the news, propped up in bed, bald from her first week of chemotherapy. His lawyer, David Kessler, expensive suit, shark eyes, argued that Grant was a respected businessman with no criminal record, that the charges were based on unreliable witness testimony. That shock manifests differently in different people. My client's wife fell at a charity event. His response, while perhaps inappropriate, does not constitute criminal intent. The prosecutor argued back. He laughed while his pregnant wife bled on the floor. We have video evidence. Shock, Kessler repeated. Not malice. The judge set bail at $10 million. Grant's family trust posted it within an hour. 6 days after his arrest, Grant walked free. Rebecca watched him exit the courthouse on TV. Reporters swarmed him. Cameras flashed. He looked tired, but his smile was perfect. Do you have a statement about your wife's condition? A reporter asked. Grant's expression shifted to concern so genuine it would have fooled Rebecca 6 months ago. Rebecca is struggling with some very serious health issues, both physical and mental. I'm praying for her recovery. I hope she gets the help she needs. The implication was clear. She was crazy, unstable, lying. Rebecca turned off the TV and vomited into the basin beside her bed. 2 days later, Grant's lawyers filed a motion to dismiss all criminal charges. They presented the prenuptial agreement Rebecca had signed the week before their wedding. She'd been so desperate to escape her debt, so grateful for his help, that she'd barely read it. Page 47, Clause 18-B. Party B hereby waives the right to pursue criminal charges arising from any domestic dispute, conflict, or incident occurring during the marriage, except in cases of premeditated murder. Rebecca's pro bono lawyer, a young woman named Sarah Mills, who volunteered at the women's shelter, sat beside her hospital bed and explained it in terms Rebecca could barely process. This clause is unconscionable, but it's technically legal in New York. The judge has discretion, but the law is on Grant's side. So he can assault me and face no consequences? The federal wire fraud case remains. The FBI is still investigating his company, but the assault charges, they're dismissing them. Rebecca stared at the wall. He planned this from the beginning. He paid my mother's debt so I'd be grateful. He married me for optics. He took out life insurance on me, and he made sure I couldn't fight back. Sarah nodded slowly. We can try to challenge the prenup, but it will take months, maybe years. I don't have years. I have stage 3 cancer and a daughter in the NICU. I know, Sarah squeezed Rebecca's hand, but you're alive. That counts for something. Rebecca wanted to believe that. But when Grant's sentence came down, charges dismissed due to the prenuptial clause, all she felt was the crushing weight of a system designed to protect men like him. The only bright spot came from an unexpected source. Elena Ross was still in jail. She couldn't afford the $50,000 bail. Her public defender called Rebecca 3 weeks after the assault. My client wants to speak with you. She's willing to testify against Grant Hayes, but she'd like to meet you first. Rebecca shouldn't have agreed. Elena had kicked her chair, had caused the fall that nearly killed her daughter. But something in the lawyer's voice made her say yes. They met in the jail's visiting room. Elena looked smaller than she had in the red dress. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup. She looked young and terrified. I didn't know you'd fall that hard, Elena said immediately. I just wanted to scare you. He told me. I know what he told you. Rebecca's voice was surprisingly gentle. He told you I was leaving him, that we were just a business arrangement. Elena's eyes widened. How did you? Because he told me you were a stalker, that you'd been trying to extort him. He played us both. The silence stretched between them, two women staring at each other across a table, seeing their own reflection in someone else's pain. He got me pregnant when I was 19, Elena said finally. Paid for the abortion. Gave me $15,000 to disappear. I spent 13 years getting over him. Then he showed up at my office and said he'd never stop thinking about me, that he wanted another chance. She laughed bitterly. I believed him. I married him because he paid off my mother's medical debt, $340,000. I thought he was saving me. He was buying me. Elena wiped her eyes. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Help me, Rebecca said. Tell them everything. The texts, the calls, what he whispered to you at the gala. What did he whisper? I don't know, but you do. Elena took a shaky breath. He said, do it now, kick her chair. I'll say she tripped. You'll be my hero. Rebecca closed her eyes. There it was. Premeditation. Conspiracy. Will you testify to that? Yes. Elena's voice was stronger now. He destroyed both of us. I'm not letting him walk away. The prosecutors refiled charges. Conspiracy to commit assault with intent to cause severe bodily harm, plus attempted insurance fraud. The trial was set for 14 months away. The legal system moved slowly, grinding through motions and discovery, while Rebecca fought cancer and Elena sat in jail and Grace struggled to breathe in the NICU. But at least now there was a chance. A small, fragile chance that maybe justice wasn't completely dead. Rebecca held on to that thought through 6 rounds of chemotherapy, through losing her hair and 40 pounds, through living in the women's shelter where she used to work, through 4 months of watching Grace fight for every breath. The day Grace came home from the NICU, Rebecca held her daughter in the tiny room at the shelter and whispered, we made it this far. We can make it the rest of the way. Grace weighed 6 pounds. She had her grandmother's eyes, and when she looked at Rebecca, it felt like a promise that some fights were worth finishing. The months between Grace's homecoming and the trial stretched like a wound that wouldn't close. Rebecca lived in a furnished room at the women's shelter, 12 feet by 10, with a shared bathroom down the hall. The same shelter where she'd worked before marrying Grant. Some of the women she'd helped now helped her. Life's funny that way, said Carmen, a survivor of domestic violence who'd been at the shelter for 6 months. She was the one who showed Rebecca how to heat bottles one-handed while holding a crying baby. You never know when you'll be the one needing the life raft. Rebecca worked remotely for $12 an hour doing data entry for an insurance company. The work was mind-numbing, but it paid for diapers and formula. Grace's medical bills, hundreds of thousands of dollars, sat in a pile on the dresser, unopened. What was the point? She'd be paying them off for the rest of her life, however long that was. The cancer was in remission, but Dr. Bennett had been clear. Stage 3 ovarian cancer had a 60% 5-year survival rate. Rebecca tried not to think about the 40%. Instead, she focused on Grace. Every milestone felt like a victory. First smile at 6 weeks. First laugh at 3 months. Rolling over at 4 months. Each one proof that despite everything, life could still grow in the wreckage. But the trial hung over everything like a storm cloud that wouldn't break. Grant, meanwhile, was winning the public relations war. He'd hired a crisis management firm. Suddenly he was everywhere. Podcast interviews, opinion pieces, even a TED Talk about overcoming false accusations. He started a foundation called the Hayes Center for Mental Health Awareness. My wife's illness affected her deeply, he said on a podcast that reached 2 million listeners. I'm heartbroken for her. But I also have to protect myself from false accusations driven by trauma and paranoia. He never mentioned the video, the one where he laughed while Rebecca bled. His lawyers had filed multiple motions claiming the footage was edited, taken out of context, that his laugh was actually a nervous reaction misinterpreted by people who didn't understand trauma responses. Public opinion split down the middle. Half the country saw him as a monster. The other half saw Rebecca as a gold digger who'd married for money and cried abuse when the well ran dry. The hashtags told the story. Justice for Rebecca versus Free Grant Hayes. Both trending. Both certain. Mart, they were right. Rebecca stopped reading the comments after someone found her address and showed up at the shelter at 2 in the morning, screaming that she was a liar who deserved to die. Security called the police. The woman was arrested. But Rebecca didn't sleep for 3 days after that. Elena called from jail once a month. Her public defender had negotiated the plea deal, testify against Grant, and serve 18 months instead of 5 years. I keep thinking about what you said, Elena told Rebecca during one call, about how he played us both. It helps, knowing I wasn't just stupid. You weren't stupid. You were human. So were you. The trial date kept getting pushed back. Legal motions, scheduling conflicts, a judge who had a heart attack and had to be replaced. 14 months became 16, then 18. Grace turned 1. Rebecca made cupcakes in the shelter's communal kitchen. A few of the other women came to celebrate, bringing dollar store gifts and singing off-key. Grace smashed her face into a cupcake and laughed, and for one perfect hour, Rebecca forgot about trials and cancer and the man who'd almost destroyed them both. That night, Grace's lawyer called. The trial starts in 6 weeks. Are you ready? Rebecca looked at her daughter sleeping in the porta-crib beside her bed. Grace's tiny chest rose and fell, with the steady rhythm of life continuing despite everything. I don't think anyone's ready for something like this, but I'll be there. The media circus began 2 weeks before the trial. Camera crews camped outside the courthouse. Protesters held signs, some supporting Rebecca, some supporting Grant. A celebrity influencer with 20 million followers posted a video claiming the whole thing was orchestrated for publicity. Rebecca's lawyer, Sarah Mills, prepared her for what was coming. They're going to attack your character. They'll say you married him for money. They'll bring up your financial troubles, your mother's medical bills, everything. You need to be ready. I did marry him for money, Rebecca said quietly, not consciously, but he paid my mother's debt and I was grateful and desperate, and I let that turn into something I called love. I'm not going to lie about that. Sarah nodded. Good. The truth is your strongest defense, even when it's ugly. They met 3 times a week to prepare. Sarah asked every cruel question Grant's lawyers would ask. What were you thinking when you signed the prenup? Did you read it? Why not? Didn't you suspect he was cheating? Why did you stay? Rebecca answered until her voice went hoarse. Until she could say I was afraid without crying, until she could look at her own choices clearly and still believe she deserved to survive them. The prosecutors on the federal fraud case shared their evidence with the assault prosecution team. They'd been investigating Hayes Technologies for 2 years before the Gala. Wire fraud, investor manipulation, offshore accounts hiding money that should have been taxable. Agent Sarah Green, Martha's sister, the FBI agent who'd arrested Grant at the Gala, visited Rebecca at the shelter one afternoon. We've been building this case for a long time, Sarah said. She sat on the floor playing with Grace while Rebecca folded laundry. The assault gave us probable cause to freeze his assets and accelerate everything. But I want you to understand something. Even if we win on fraud, even if he goes to prison for that, it doesn't mean you'll win on the assault charges. I know. The prenup complicates everything. His lawyers are good. They're arguing that you're signing away the right to press charges makes this a civil matter, not criminal. Can they do that? Maybe. The judge has discretion, but it's possible Grant walks free on the assault and only serves time for fraud. Rebecca focused on folding a tiny pink onesie. Then at least he serves some time. Is that enough for you? Rebecca thought about it. Grant in prison for fraud, but not for orchestrating her assault, not for laughing while she bled, not for trying to destroy her so he could collect life insurance money. No, she said finally, but it's more than some women get. 3 weeks before the trial, Grant's lawyer called with an offer. Mr. Hayes is willing to settle the civil suit. $5 million to you, plus a full trust fund for Grace's medical care and education. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement and drop all remaining criminal charges. Rebecca held the phone so tight her knuckles went white. $5 million. Grace's future secured. No more $12 an hour data entry. No more living in a shelter. No more wondering how to pay for the cancer screenings she'd need for the rest of her life. I need time to think about it, she said. You have 48 hours. Rebecca sat on her narrow bed after the call ended. Grace was at the shelter's daycare. The room was silent except for the sound of traffic outside and someone's TV playing through thin walls. $5 million to make sure Grant never faced real consequences for what he did. She thought about all the women who'd passed through this shelter. The ones who'd taken settlement money because they had no other choice. The ones who'd signed NDAs because staying silent was the only way to survive. She thought about her mother, who died buried under medical bills because the system valued profit over people. She thought about Elena, sitting in jail waiting to testify because she'd finally decided the truth mattered more than protecting herself. And she thought about Grace, who deserved to grow up knowing her mother had fought for something bigger than money. Rebecca called Sarah Mills. He offered $5 million to drop the charges and sign an NDA. Jesus, that's a lot of money. I know. What are you going to do? Oh, Rebecca looked at the pile of unopened medical bills, at the cramped room that was all she could afford, at the future that money could buy. I'm going to trial, she said. The night before jury selection, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She lay in bed watching Grace breathe, counting each inhale like a prayer. At 3 in the morning, her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Martha Green. I just wanted you to know I'll be there tomorrow. You're not alone in this. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Martha, who'd filmed the assault and lost her event planning career because of it. Martha, who'd been threatened and harassed and subpoenaed for 18 months. Martha, who could have walked away but chose to stay. Rebecca texted back, "Thank you for everything." 3 dots appeared, then, "Some things are worth the cost." Rebecca stared at those words until sleep finally came. The Manhattan Criminal Courthouse looked like something from a movie, all marble columns and granite steps. Reporters lined both sides of the walkway, shouting questions that blurred into white noise. Rebecca walked between Sarah Mills and a court officer, her head down, one hand clutching her purse. Someone threw something. It hit her shoulder, a crumpled piece of paper with "Liar" scrawled in red marker. "Keep moving," the court officer said quietly. Inside, the courthouse was cooler, quieter. The marble floors echoed with footsteps. They took an elevator to the 5th floor, walked through security, and entered courtroom 7B. Rebecca had seen courtrooms on TV. She wasn't prepared for how small it felt, how ordinary. Wooden benches like church pews, fluorescent lights that hummed faintly. A seal on the wall that was supposed to mean something about justice but just looked like decoration. Grant sat at the defense table with David Kessler and 2 other lawyers. He wore a navy suit and a concerned expression. When Rebecca entered, he looked at her with what seemed like genuine sadness. She knew it was a performance, but it was a good one. The gallery was packed. Rebecca recognized some faces, women from the shelter, advocates from nonprofit groups, a few journalists she'd spoken to. Martha Green sat in the front row behind the prosecution table. Their eyes met briefly. Martha nodded once. "All rise." Judge Patricia Morales entered from a side door. She was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been a prosecutor before becoming the judge. Sarah had told Rebecca this was good news. "The people versus Grant Michael Hayes," Judge Morales said. Case number 21-4873. We're here for jury selection. The process took 2 days. Potential jurors filed in 12 at a time. The prosecution and defense took turns asking questions. Have you heard about this case? Everyone had. Can you set aside what you've heard and judge based only on evidence presented in this courtroom? Everyone said yes. Rebecca didn't believe half of them. Grant's lawyers wanted wealthy men who saw prenuptial agreements as sacred contracts. The prosecution wanted working-class women who understood what it meant to be trapped. By the end of day 2, they had their jury, 7 women, 5 men, mixed ages, mixed races, mixed backgrounds. Rebecca tried to read their faces but couldn't. That night, Grace ran a fever. Rebecca sat up until dawn, holding her daughter, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. By morning, the fever broke. Rebecca dressed for court in a light yellow blouse, the same color as the gala dress. A deliberate choice. Let the jury make the connection. Opening statements began on day 3. Prosecutor Julia Mendez was 39, sharp-featured, with a voice that could cut glass. She stood in front of the jury box and spoke without notes. Members of the jury, this case is about power, about what happens when someone with money and influence decides another person is disposable. On November 14, 2019, Rebecca Hart attended a charity gala with her husband, the defendant, Grant Hayes. She was 6 months pregnant. She wore a yellow dress. She sat at a table while her husband worked the room. Mendez pulled up the video on a screen. The jury watched Rebecca fall, watched the blood spread, watched Grant laugh. You'll hear that laugh again during this trial. You'll see it from multiple angles. You'll hear witnesses describe it. And the defense will tell you it was shock, that people respond to trauma differently, that Mr. Hayes was confused, overwhelmed, not thinking clearly. Mendez paused. But you'll also hear recordings, text messages, testimony from Elena Ross, the woman who kicked the chair. She'll tell you that Grant Hayes orchestrated this assault, that he whispered instructions to her moments before it happened, that he promised her a future together if she helped him get rid of his wife. Because Rebecca wasn't just pregnant, she'd become inconvenient. And Grant Hayes had taken out a $10 million life insurance policy on her 2 months before the gala. Gasps from the gallery. Rebecca hadn't known about the life insurance policy timeline. That detail was new. This case is simple, Mendez continued. A man decided his wife was worth more dead than alive. He manipulated another woman into carrying out an assault, and when his wife lay bleeding on the floor, he laughed. The evidence will show premeditation, conspiracy, and a complete lack of remorse. Hold him accountable. Mendez sat down. David Kessler stood. He was older than Mendez, with gray hair and expensive glasses. He smiled at the jury like they were old friends. My client is not a monster. He's a man who made mistakes in his personal life, who trusted the wrong person, who responded poorly in a moment of crisis, but he is not guilty of the crimes charged here. Kessler's voice was warm, almost fatherly. The prosecution wants you to believe a conspiracy theory, that Grant Hayes, a successful businessman, a philanthropist, a man who's donated millions to charity, would risk everything to hurt his wife. Why? For insurance money he didn't need? He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The idea that he'd orchestrate something this public, this risky, for $10 million is absurd. Kessler walked closer to the jury. What actually happened? Grant's ex-girlfriend, Elena Ross, became obsessed with him. She couldn't accept that he'd moved on. When she saw him happy with his pregnant wife, she snapped. She kicked the chair. Rebecca fell. It was terrible, tragic, but it wasn't Grant's fault. And the laugh? Grant was in shock. He'd just seen his wife fall. He was surrounded by cameras, by guests, by pressure. People respond to trauma in different ways. Some cry, some go silent, some laugh. It's not rational. It's human. Kessler returned to the defense table. The prosecution wants revenge. They want to punish a successful man for the crime of being wealthy. Don't let them. Look at the evidence. Not the edited video, not the emotional testimony, the actual evidence. And you'll see that Grant Hayes is innocent. Judge Morales looked at the clock. We'll break for lunch. Court resumes at 2 p.m. Rebecca ate a granola bar in a witness room. Her stomach was too tight for anything else. Sarah Mills sat across from her, reviewing notes. The life insurance thing, Rebecca said. I didn't know about the timing. We just got the records last week. He took out the policy 8 weeks before the gala, dated it back to make it look routine. Does that help us? It establishes motive. But Kessler will argue that wealthy people take out life insurance policies all the time, that it's just good financial planning. Rebecca closed her eyes. Everything he does has plausible deniability. That's why we need Elena's testimony. She's the one who can prove conspiracy. What if she changes her mind? What if she decides protecting herself is more important? Then we lose. The simple honesty of it made Rebecca want to scream. 18 months of waiting. 18 months of barely surviving. And it could all come down to whether one woman decided to tell the truth. The afternoon session began with Martha Green on the stand. She wore a gray suit and looked calm despite the 100 people watching her. Mendez walked her through the events of November 14th. I was adjusting the floral centerpieces near the hearts table, Martha said. I saw the woman in red approach. Elena Ross, she seemed upset. She was talking to Rebecca. Then Mr. Hayes intervened. What did you observe about Mr. Hayes' behavior? He pulled Elena aside, whispered something to her. I couldn't hear what, but I saw her face change like she'd been given instructions. Objection, Kessler said. Speculation about facial expressions. Sustained. The witness will stick to what she saw and heard. Martha nodded. After the whisper, Elena returned to the table. Within 30 seconds, she kicked the chair. Rebecca fell. I immediately called 911. What was Grant Hayes' reaction to his wife falling? He laughed, then he walked away toward the bar. Did he check on her? Call for help? Attempt to assist in any way? No, Mendez showed the video. Is this what you saw? Yes. Why did you record it? Because I knew what I just witnessed, and I knew someone would try to make it disappear. Martha's voice was steady, but her hands gripped the witness stand. I've worked in event management for 30 years. I've seen people fall. I've seen accidents. This wasn't an accident, and his response wasn't shock. It was satisfaction. Objection! Sustained. The jury will disregard the witness's characterization of Mr. Hayes' emotional state. But the damage was done. The jury had heard it. Satisfaction. The word hung in the air even after the judge struck it from the record. Kessler cross-examined. Miss Green, isn't it true that Hayes Technologies fired you 4 years ago? I resigned after being falsely accused of theft. But there was an accusation, a formal one, which was never proven, which I was never charged with, because it wasn't true. Yet you have a reason to dislike Mr. Hayes, a motive to distort what you saw. Martha looked directly at Kessler. I have a reason to tell the truth. I watched a man laugh while his pregnant wife bled on the floor. That's not something you forget. That's not something you lie about. The courtroom was silent. No further questions, Kessler said. Agent Sarah Green testified next. She explained the FBI's investigation into Hayes Technologies, the wire fraud charges, the offshore accounts. The assault gave us probable cause to freeze Mr. Hayes' assets and accelerate our investigation. But we'd been watching him for 18 months before the gala. And what did you observe at the gala? I witnessed the entire incident. I was working undercover as a guest. I saw Elena Ross kick the chair. I saw Rebecca Hart fall. I saw Grant Hayes laugh. I immediately called for backup and arrested Mr. Hayes on site. Did he resist arrest? No, but he did say, and I quote, "Do you know who I am?" A few people in the gallery laughed. Judge Morales shot them a warning look. Kessler's cross-examination focused on the FBI's investigation. Isn't it convenient that this assault happened right when you needed probable cause? It wasn't convenient. It was evidence of a pattern. Mr. Hayes has a history of viewing people as disposable when they no longer serve his interests. Objection. The witness's personal opinions. Sustained. But again, the jury had heard it. The trial adjourned at 5 p.m. Rebecca returned to the shelter exhausted. Grace was teething, crying, refusing to sleep. Rebecca walked her around the small room for 2 hours, singing off-key lullabies, trying not to think about tomorrow. Tomorrow, Elena would testify. Tomorrow, everything could change. Elena Ross looked smaller than Rebecca remembered. The red dress from the gala had been replaced by a simple gray suit. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup. She walked to the witness stand like someone approaching a cliff edge, knowing she had to jump. Rebecca watched from the gallery. Sarah Mills had decided not to call her as a witness. Her cancer diagnosis and financial desperation made her too easy to attack. Better to let the evidence speak. But Rebecca needed to see this, needed to watch Elena tell the truth. Prosecutor Mendez approached gently. "Miss Ross, can you tell the jury how you know Grant Hayes?" Elena's voice was quiet. The judge asked her to speak up. "We dated in college, University of Washington, 2009 to 2010. What happened during that relationship?" "I got pregnant. I was 19. Elena's hands twisted in her lap. "Grant's father paid for an abortion and gave me $15,000 to leave Seattle and never contact Grant again." "Did you accept the money?" "Yes, I was a college sophomore with no family support. I didn't think I had a choice." "Did you have any contact with Grant Hayes after that?" "Not for 13 years. Then last year, his company hired my event planning firm to organize the annual charity gala." "Did you know it was his company when you signed the contract?" "No, his assistant handled everything. I didn't realize until I saw his name on the vendor list." "What happened when you realized?" "I called him. I said I'd have to back out, that it was too complicated. He asked to meet in person to discuss it." Elena described the meeting at her office. Grant's tears, his apologies, his claim that he'd thought about her every day for 13 years. He said he'd made a mistake letting his father control his life, that he should have stood by me, that he wanted another chance. Another chance at what? A relationship. He said he was leaving his wife, that the marriage was just for business purposes, that after the gala he'd announced the separation and we could be together. Mendez pulled up text messages. Elena confirmed they were real. Grant to Elena, October 28th. "I can't stop thinking about you. I've wasted 13 years without you." Grant to Elena, November 10th. "After the gala, everything changes. I promise." Grant to Elena, November 14th, morning. "Tonight's the night. Just trust me." "Did you believe him?" "Yes," Elena's voice broke. "I wanted to believe him. I'd spent 13 years wondering if I'd made the right choice, if maybe we could have been happy. So when he said we could try again, I let myself hope." "What happened at the gala?" Elena took a breath. "I arrived around 11 p.m. I saw Grant with his wife. She was pregnant. He told me they weren't together anymore, but seeing them, it felt like a lie." "What did you do?" "I confronted Rebecca. I was angry. I felt betrayed. I said things I shouldn't have said." "What happened next?" "Grant pulled me aside. He whispered in my ear." "What did he say?" Elena looked at Grant. He stared back, his expression unreadable. "He said, 'Do it now, kick her chair. I'll say she tripped. You'll be my hero. Then we're free.'" Gasps from the gallery. Judge Morales banged her gavel once. "And did you?" Mendez asked. "Yes." Tears ran down Elena's face. "I kicked the chair. I watched her fall. I watched her bleed. And I thought Grant would protect me, that he'd keep his promise." "What happened instead?" "He blamed me. When the police came, he said I was obsessed with him, that he'd rejected me and I'd snapped. He threw me under the bus to save himself." Elena wiped her eyes with the tissue the bailiff handed her. "I was stupid. I was desperate, but I'm not lying. Grant Hayes told me to kick that chair. He orchestrated the whole thing." Mendez played a recording. Elena's voice was thin, asking Grant to visit her in jail. Grant's response was cold. "Grant, I can't be seen with you. It looks bad." Elena, "You promised we'd be together." Grant, "I never promised anything. You misunderstood." Elena, "You told me to kick her chair." Grant, "That's not what happened. You were emotional. You heard what you wanted to hear." The recording ended. The courtroom was silent. "Miss Ross, do you have any reason to lie about this?" "No, I've already pleaded guilty to assault. I'm serving 18 months. I have nothing to gain from testifying except maybe sleeping at night." "Thank you. No further questions." David Kessler stood. His cross-examination was brutal. Miss Ross, you loved Grant Hayes, didn't you? Once, a long time ago. And when he rejected you again, you wanted revenge. No, I wanted the truth. The truth according to you, a woman who admits she was obsessed with my client. I wasn't obsessed. I was manipulated. You kicked a pregnant woman's chair hard enough to make her fall. That's not manipulation. That's assault. I know what I did. I'm not making excuses. But you are blaming my client. Conveniently, the only person who can contradict your version is the man you admit you have reason to hate. I don't hate him. Elena's voice was steady now. I pity him because he's so empty inside that he destroys people for entertainment. Objection. Sustained. The jury will disregard. But again, the words had landed. Kessler pulled up Elena's financial records. You're $200,000 in debt, aren't you? Student loans, yes. And struggling to keep your business afloat. Most small business owners are. Did the prosecution offer you any financial incentive to testify? No. Did anyone? No. So you're testifying out of pure altruism. I'm testifying because Rebecca Hart is a human being who didn't deserve what happened to her, and because I'm tired of protecting men who destroy women. Kessler tried a few more angles, but Elena didn't break. When she left the stand, she looked at Rebecca. Their eyes met. Elena mouthed, "I'm sorry." Rebecca nodded. It wasn't forgiveness. Not quite, but it was understanding. The trial continued for 3 more days. Expert witnesses testified about Grant's finances, the life insurance policy, the offshore accounts. Character witnesses spoke about his history of manipulation. One woman, Caroline Foster, an ex-girlfriend from 5 years ago, testified that Grant had threatened her when she tried to leave. He said, if I talked to anyone about our relationship, he'd destroy my career. And he did. I'm a journalist. I haven't been able to get hired anywhere significant since. The defense called witnesses who praised Grant's charity work, his business acumen, his contributions to technology. They painted him as a misunderstood visionary persecuted by bitter ex-girlfriends and a gold-digging wife. Finally, Grant took the stand. He wore a dark suit and looked humble, almost broken. His performance was masterful. I loved Rebecca, he said. I still do. I married her because I admired her work, her compassion, her strength. Yes, I paid her mother's medical bills, not as manipulation, as kindness. I had the money. She needed help. Why wouldn't I? Did you orchestrate the assault on your wife? His lawyer asked. Absolutely not. Elena Ross became fixated on me when we reconnected. I tried to let her down gently. I never promised her anything. I never told her to hurt Rebecca. What about your laugh at the gala? Grant's eyes filled with tears. I was in shock. My wife had fallen. People were staring. Cameras were everywhere. I froze. My mind went blank. And yes, I laughed. It wasn't funny. It was horrible. But that's how my brain processed the trauma. I've been in therapy since that night trying to understand why I reacted that way. Rebecca wanted to vomit. Prosecutor Mendez's cross-examination was clinical. Mr. Hayes, you took out a $10 million life insurance policy on your wife 2 months before the gala. Why? Standard financial planning. I have life insurance on myself too. But you increased her policy from $2 million to $10 million, specifically 8 weeks before the assault. Why the sudden increase? My accountant recommended it for tax purposes. Your accountant or your lawyer? I don't remember. Mendez pulled up the text messages to Elena. Made Grant read them aloud. Each one sounded worse in his voice. Do these messages sound like someone letting another person down gently? I was trying not to hurt her feelings. By promising you'd be together? I never promised that. The messages say otherwise. People read what they want to read. Mendez played the video of the assault one more time. Zoomed in on Grant's face, on his laugh. That's shock? Yes. That's your traumatized response to seeing your pregnant wife bleeding? Yes. And walking away, not calling for help, not checking on her? That's also shock? Grant's composure cracked slightly. I didn't know what to do. You knew how to laugh. You knew how to walk to the bar, but you didn't know how to help your wife? I was confused. Confused or satisfied? Objection. Withdrawn. No further questions. Closing arguments happened on a Friday. Mendez stood before the jury and spoke for 30 minutes, walking them through every piece of evidence. The texts, the insurance policy, the whisper, the laugh. Grant Hayes is a man who views people as assets. When Rebecca Hart became inconvenient, he tried to erase her. The evidence is clear. The recordings are real. The witnesses are credible. Hold him accountable. Kessler's closing was equally polished. He focused on reasonable doubt, on the possibility that Elena had misheard, that the insurance was coincidental, that the laugh was trauma. Don't let emotion override reason. Don't punish a man for being wealthy. Look at the actual evidence. You'll see reasonable doubt. You'll see a man who made mistakes but isn't guilty of conspiracy. Judge Morales gave the jury their instructions. They filed out at 4 p.m. Rebecca returned to the shelter and waited. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, then 8, then 12. By Saturday morning, everyone was exhausted. Rebecca couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just held Grace and stared at her phone, waiting for Sarah Mills to call. The call came at 2 p.m. They've reached a verdict. Rebecca's hands shook so hard she could barely hold the phone. Already? Fast deliberations can go either way. Be at the courthouse in an hour. Rebecca left Grace with Carmen at the shelter, kissed her daughter's forehead. I'll be back soon, baby girl. The courthouse felt different now, heavier. The gallery was packed, standing room only. Camera crews filmed from the hallway. Rebecca sat behind the prosecution table, Martha Green beside her. Grant sat at the defense table perfectly still. Only his hands betrayed his nervousness, fingers tapping the wood in a rhythm only he could hear. Judge Morales entered. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood, an older woman, a teacher from Brooklyn. Yes, Your Honor. On the count of conspiracy to commit assault with intent to cause severe bodily harm. How do you find? The foreman looked at Grant. Guilty. The word detonated through the courtroom. Gasps, murmurs. Someone in the back started clapping until the judge gavelled them silent. On the count of attempted insurance fraud, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of wire fraud? Guilty. Grant's face went white. His lawyers put their hands on his shoulders, holding him in his seat. The defendant will remain in custody pending sentencing, Judge Morales said. Bailiff? 2 officers approached Grant. He stood slowly, looked back at Rebecca one last time. She met his eyes and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief. Just the vast emptiness of a war that had finally ended. They led him away in handcuffs. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exit. Rebecca sat very still, trying to feel something, anything beyond the numbness spreading through her chest. Martha squeezed her hand. It's over. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Sentencing happened 2 weeks later. The courtroom was less crowded this time. No protesters, no camera crews inside. Just the principals and a few reporters taking notes. Grant stood before Judge Morales in an orange jumpsuit. His expensive lawyers flanked him, but their expressions were resigned. They'd filed appeals, of course. They'd fight this for years. But today, the sentence would be read. Judge Morales looked at Grant over her glasses. Mr. Hayes, you used your wealth and influence to manipulate, endanger, and discard the people around you. You viewed your wife as disposable. You orchestrated an assault on her while she was 6 months pregnant. You laughed while she bled. And when caught, you showed no remorse, only calculation. She consulted her notes. I've reviewed the sentencing guidelines. I've considered your lack of criminal history. I've heard testimony about your charitable work. And I've weighed that against the severity of your crimes and the callousness of your actions. Pause. On the conspiracy charge, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. On the insurance fraud charge, 10 years. On the wire fraud charges, 8 years. Sentenced to run consecutively. Total of 33 years, with possibility of parole after 25. Grant's lawyers immediately began speaking. Your Honor, we request. Judge Morales held up her hand. The sentence stands. Bailiff, remove the defendant. Grant was led away. He didn't look back this time. Rebecca sat in the gallery, trying to process the number. 25 years minimum. He was 41 now. He'd be 66 before parole eligibility. Grace would be an adult with her own life. The man who tried to destroy them would spend the best years of his life in a cell. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the end of something that had consumed too much of her life already. Elena's sentencing happened the same day. Different courtroom. 3 years in federal prison, eligible for parole in 18 months. Time already served counted toward her sentence. Rebecca attended, sat in the back. When Elena was let out, their eyes met again. This time, Rebecca smiled slightly. Elena smiled back. Two women bound together by one man's cruelty, both paying the price for believing his lies. The media coverage was intense but brief. America's attention span was short. Within a week, a new scandal dominated the headlines. Within a month, people had mostly forgotten about the woman in the yellow dress and the billionaire who'd laughed while she bled. Rebecca returned to the shelter, returned to data entry, returned to the small, ordinary life she'd been building in the wreckage. 6 months after sentencing, Grant's lawyers filed an appeal. They argued that some of Elena's testimony should have been excluded, that the recordings were obtained improperly, that the jury had been prejudiced by media coverage. The appeals court agreed on a technicality. 2 of the charges were overturned. The conspiracy conviction stood, but the insurance fraud conviction was thrown out due to improper evidence handling. New sentence, 8 years, eligible for parole in 4. Rebecca watched the news with Grace sleeping in her lap. 8 years. He could be out when Grace was 6 years old, still young enough to remember if he tried to establish custody, still young enough to be hurt by his presence in her life. The number felt like a betrayal. But Rebecca was tired of fighting, tired of letting Grant Hayes take up space in her head, tired of waiting for justice that would never feel sufficient. That night, his lawyer called with a new offer. Mr. Hayes is willing to settle all civil claims, $5 million to you, full trust fund for Grace's medical care and education. In exchange, you sign a comprehensive NDA and agree not to pursue any further legal action. Rebecca stared at Grace, who was teething on a plastic ring and drooling on Rebecca's shirt. I need 72 hours to think about it. I can give you 48. Then you'll have my answer in 48 hours. Rebecca hung up and sat in the silence of her small room. $5 million. Grace's future secured. No more struggling. No more wondering how to pay for cancer screenings or rent or the million small expenses of survival. All she had to do was promise never to speak Grant Hayes' name in public again. Rebecca couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster. 48 hours to decide if truth was worth more than $5 million. At 3 a.m., she called Sarah Mills. I'm sorry to wake you. I was up anyway, couldn't sleep either. Sarah's voice was thick with exhaustion. You're calling about the settlement. How did you know? Because it's what I'd be thinking about too. Papers rustled in the background. $5 million is life-changing money, Rebecca. I can't tell you to turn it down. But I also can't tell you that money will feel it clean. Every time you use it, you'll remember what you had to give up to get it. Rebecca thought about that. Money that came with silence sewn into it like a wire. Money that would pay for Grace's education but couldn't be talked about. Money that would fix the material problems of her life while leaving the moral ones bleeding. What would you do? Rebecca asked. I don't know. I'd like to think I'd turn it down, that I'd choose truth over money. But I've never been where you are. I've never had to make that choice. After they hung up, Rebecca walked to the window. The shelter was in Queens, not far from the courthouse. She could see the skyline of Manhattan in the distance. All those buildings full of people sleeping or working or making their own impossible choices. She thought about all the women who'd come through this shelter. How many had taken settlement money because they had no other option? How many had signed NDAs because staying silent was the only way to survive? She thought about her mother, who died buried in medical debt because the system valued profit over people. She thought about Elena, who'd served her time and was rebuilding her life in North Carolina, free of Grant's shadow. And she thought about Grace, who deserved to grow up knowing that some things mattered more than money. That truth had value, that her mother had fought for something bigger than financial security. The next morning, Rebecca asked Carmen to watch Grace for a few hours. "Where are you going?" Carmen asked. "To make a decision." Rebecca took a train to the federal correctional facility where Grant was serving his sentence. It was 3 hours upstate, surrounded by farmland and barbed wire. She'd never visited before, never wanted to see him again, but she needed to look him in the eye when she made her choice. The visiting room was exactly what she'd expected. Concrete floors, plastic tables, vending machines that were always out of order, guards watching from the corners, the smell of industrial cleaner and desperation. Grant appeared after 15 minutes. Prison hadn't broken him yet. He'd lost weight, looked older, but his eyes were still sharp, still calculating. He sat across from her. The table between them felt both too wide and not wide enough. "You came," he said. "I wanted to see you. One last time." To gloat? No, to decide. He leaned back, trying to look casual. "My lawyer said you are considering the settlement." "I am." "Good. It's the smart choice. Grace deserves better than what you can give here on your own. $5 million will change her life." Rebecca pulled out a photo. Grace's second birthday party, held in the shelter's common room with dollar store decorations and a homemade cake. Grace was smiling, face covered in frosting, completely happy. She slid it across the table. "She looks like my mother," Rebecca said. "She has her eyes, her laugh, her way of finding joy in small things." Grant glanced at the photo but didn't pick it up. "She'll never remember you, Rebecca continued. "I'll make sure of it. When she's old enough to ask about her father, I'll tell her the truth. Not to hurt her, but so she understands that fear isn't love, that wealth isn't worth your soul." Grant's mask cracked slightly. "You're condemning her to poverty." "No, I'm teaching her that some things cost too much even when they're free." She stood. "I'm not signing your NDA. Keep your money. Grace and I will figure it out on our own." "Rebecca," his voice had an edge now, the control slipping. "Wait, think about this. You're walking away from $5 million. I'm walking towards something better. There is nothing better than financial security." "You're wrong." Rebecca looked at him clearly, without fear for the first time since the gala. "There's dignity, there's truth, there's being able to look my daughter in the eye when she asks if I did the right thing." She turned to leave. "You'll regret this," Grant called after her. "When you can't pay for her college, when you can't afford her medical bills, when she asked why you chose pride over her future." Rebecca stopped at the door, looked back one last time. "The only thing I regret is ever believing you were worth the piano." She walked out. The door closed behind her with a metallic click that sounded like freedom. On the train ride home, Rebecca called Grant's lawyer. "Tell Mr. Hayes I'm not signing." Silence on the other end. Then, "You realize you're walking away from $5 million? "I realize I'm walking away from blood money. Tell him to keep it. We'll survive without him. You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." Rebecca hung up and looked out the window at the farmland rushing past. The sun was setting, turning everything gold. She thought about what came next. The continued struggle, the bills, the uncertainty, the knowledge that Grant would likely get parole in 4 years and might try to establish some custody claim on Grace. All of it was terrifying, but she'd chosen truth over silence. And somehow, despite everything, that felt like the first real choice she'd made in years. That night, Grace ran a fever again. Rebecca sat up with her, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, singing lullabies that were more prayer than song. Around midnight, Grace's fever broke. She fell asleep in Rebecca's arms, breathing steady and clear. Rebecca held her daughter and whispered, "I don't know if I made the right choice, but I made it for the right reasons. That's going to have to be enough." Outside, the city hummed with life. Millions of people making their own impossible choices. Most of them would never make headlines, would never get justice that felt sufficient, would never see their abusers face real consequences. But they survived anyway. Built small, quiet lives in the wreckage. Found ways to laugh despite everything. Rebecca decided that was its own kind of victory. The kind that didn't come with a trophy or a settlement check. Just the knowledge that she'd refused to let Grant Hayes buy her silence. that Grace would grow up knowing her mother had fought for something bigger than money. It wasn't the ending Rebecca had imagined when she'd married Grant 2 years ago, back when she'd thought love could grow from gratitude, when she'd believed a man who paid your debts might also pay attention to your heart. But it was an ending she could live with, and sometimes that was enough. 5 years passed. Rebecca watched them go like water through her fingers, fast and slow at the same time. Grace grew from a toddler to a little girl with strong opinions about everything. Her favorite color was yellow. She loved art and hated broccoli and asked approximately 1 million questions per day. They still lived in Queens, not in the shelter anymore. Rebecca had managed to save enough for a small, two-bedroom apartment. It wasn't much. The walls were thin. The radiator clanged at night, but it was theirs. Rebecca worked as a victim advocate now, helping women navigate the legal system. The organization was small, nonprofit, perpetually underfunded, but the work mattered. Every woman she helped file a restraining order, every court date she attended, every shelter referral she made, it felt like repaying a debt to the women who'd helped her. The cancer stayed away. Dr. Bennett monitored Rebecca every 3 months. Clear scans, no recurrence. Rebecca tried not to think about the statistics, about the 5-year survival rate she'd just crossed, about how every day past that threshold felt like borrowed time that might be recalled at any moment. She focused on Grace instead, on kindergarten paintings taped to the fridge, on bedtime stories, on the ordinary miracles of a childhood unmarked by trauma. Grace knew her father was someone who made bad choices. That was Rebecca's careful phrase, practiced and neutral. Grace accepted it the way children accepted all adult explanations, with a shrug and a move on to more interesting topics, like whether unicorns were real and could she please have a puppy. Money was always tight. Rebecca's salary was $38,000 a year. After rent and daycare and Grace's medical follow-ups from her premature birth, there wasn't much left. They ate a lot of pasta. Rebecca bought clothes at thrift stores. Grace's birthday parties happened at public parks with homemade cake. But they were happy, or happy enough, which was more than Rebecca had expected to be when she'd left that prison visiting room 5 years ago. Elena sent a card every year on Grace's birthday. Always the same message. Thinking of you both, I'm sorry. Always signed simply, E. Rebecca kept them in a box under her bed. She'd never responded, but she never threw them away either. Someday when Grace was older, maybe she'd want to know about Elena, about the complicated truth that people could be both victim and perpetrator. That forgiveness didn't require forgetting. Elena lived in Asheville now. Rebecca knew this from occasional Google searches she wasn't proud of. Elena had remarried a teacher named Daniel. They'd opened a small bakery called Second Chances. The reviews were good. Elena looked happy in the photos on the bakery's website. Rebecca was glad. Glad that Elena had found a life beyond Grant's shadow. Glad that redemption was possible, even for people who'd made terrible choices. She wondered sometimes if Elena searched for her too, if she knew about the advocacy work, if she felt any pride in how Rebecca had rebuilt her life. But they never contacted each other directly. Their connection existed in the space between guilt and forgiveness, too complicated to reduce to words. Martha Green remained Rebecca's closest friend. They had lunch once a month at a diner in Manhattan, splitting a check neither of them could really afford. Martha had aged more than 5 years in 5 years. Her hair had gone mostly gray. She'd left event planning entirely, working now as a consultant for nonprofit organizations. I couldn't stomach another gala, she'd explained once. Couldn't watch wealthy people pretend to care about causes while ignoring the suffering at their own tables. Over coffee one Saturday, Martha asked the question she'd been carefully not asking for years. Do you ever regret turning down the settlement? Rebecca thought about it, really thought about it. Every time I can't afford something Grace needs, every time I look at my bank account and feel that panic, every time I realize I'll never own a house or take her on vacation or send her to a good college without massive debt. She stirred her coffee. But no, I don't regret it. Because I can look at her and tell her the truth about why we struggle. And she'll grow up understanding that some things cost too much, even when they're free. Martha nodded. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. Grant's parole hearing happened when Grace was 6 years old. Rebecca received notice 4 weeks in advance. She could attend if she wanted, could submit a victim impact statement, could look him in the eye one more time. She didn't go. Instead, she wrote a letter, 2 pages, single-spaced. She told the parole board about the cancer that remained in remission but required constant monitoring, about Grace's developmental delays from premature birth, minor but expensive to treat, about the nightmares that still came sometimes. Years later, she told them about rebuilding her life from nothing, about the work she did helping other women escape situations like hers, about the choice she'd made to refuse his money and his silence. She ended the letter simply. Grant Hayes is a man who views people as disposable. He has shown no genuine remorse. I believe he remains a danger to any woman who becomes inconvenient to him. I ask that you deny parole. She mailed it and tried not to think about it. 2 weeks later, Sarah Mills called. Parole was denied. Rebecca sat down hard on her kitchen floor. Really? His own testimony did him in. He blamed you for refusing the settlement, said you were vindictive and stubborn. The board didn't like that. Denial of remorse is a major factor in these decisions. How long until his next hearing? 3 years minimum. 3 more years. Grace would be 9 before Grant had another chance at freedom. Old enough to remember if he tried to insert himself into her life, but still young enough to be shaped by it. Rebecca thanked Sarah and hung up, sat on the kitchen floor for a long time, just breathing. She wasn't safe, not really, not permanently, but she had 3 more years. 3 more years to build a life so solid that even Grant's eventual release couldn't shake it. It would have to be enough. Grace's elementary school held a spring play when she was 7, a production of The Paper Bag Princess, that story about a princess who rescues herself. Grace played the princess. She wore a paper bag costume that Rebecca had helped her make, decorated with markers and glitter. She forgot half her lines but said the important one perfectly. I don't need a prince. I can save myself. Rebecca sat in the audience between Martha and a few women from work. Her father, Jonathan, had reconciled with her during the trial, but he'd died 2 years ago. Heart attack, sudden and final. Rebecca still missed him. Wished he could have met Grace properly, seen how strong his granddaughter was becoming. When Grace took her bow, she searched the audience until she found Rebecca, waved enthusiastically. Rebecca waved back, tears streaming down her face. After the play, Grace ran to her, still wearing the paper bag dress. Did you see me, Mama? Rebecca knelt down, hugging her tight. I saw everything. You were so brave. As brave as you? Braver. They walked home hand in hand. The spring air was warm. Flowers bloomed in the window boxes of brownstones they'd never be able to afford. Grace skipped ahead, then stopped suddenly. Mama, my friend Sophia says everyone has a daddy. Where's mine? Rebecca had been preparing for this question for years. She knelt down to Grace's level. Your daddy made some very bad choices. He hurt people, including me. Did he hurt me too? He tried, but you're stronger than he ever imagined you'd be. Grace thought about this. Is he in jail? Yes. Good. Grace's certainty was absolute. Mean people should be in jail. If only it were that simple, Rebecca thought, if only the world worked that way. But Grace didn't need to know yet how complicated justice really was. How many mean people never saw the inside of a cell? How many victims never got their day in court? How survival often meant accepting less than you deserved, because at least it was something. Grace would learn all that eventually, but not today. Today, she could be 7 years old and believe that mean people went to jail and princesses saved themselves and mamas were brave. Rebecca stood up. Come on, brave girl. Let's go home and celebrate with ice cream. Chocolate? Obviously chocolate. They walked the rest of the way home, Grace chattering about the play and her friends and whether they could get a puppy. Please, please, please. Rebecca half listened, mostly just grateful. Grateful for this ordinary moment. For a daughter who asked about daddies but didn't dwell on them. For a life that was hard but hers. That night, after Grace fell asleep, Rebecca stood at the window looking out at Queens. Somewhere in this city, women were making impossible choices, deciding whether to leave or stay. whether to speak or stay silent, whether safety was worth the cost of admission. Rebecca hoped they chose themselves, hoped they found the strength to walk away from people who claimed to love them but only knew how to destroy. She hoped they knew that survival wasn't pretty, wasn't triumphant, was mostly just putting one foot in front of the other until enough days passed that you could call it a life. But it was worth it, even when it was hard, even when you questioned every choice, even when you wondered if you'd done the right thing. It was worth it because you were still here, still breathing, still fighting, and sometimes that was enough. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 6 years after the trial. Grace was 8 now, in third grade, obsessed with marine biology, and convinced she was going to be a dolphin trainer when she grew up. Rebecca was rushing to get her ready for school when she noticed the envelope. Heavy paper, official seal, the National Museum of Women's History in Washington, D.C. She opened it while Grace ate cereal. "Dear Miss Hart," it began, "the museum is preparing an exhibit on domestic violence and survival. We would like to include the chair from the Waldorf Astoria incident as a centerpiece of the exhibition. We believe your story represents an important moment in the national conversation about power, wealth, and justice. Would you be willing to participate?" Rebecca read it twice. They wanted the chair, the one Elena had kicked, the one Rebecca had fallen from, the one that had become somehow a symbol. Martha had kept it. After the trial, after everything, Martha had retrieved it from evidence and stored it in her garage. Just in case, she'd said. In case of what, she'd never specified. Now Rebecca knew. "Mama, why are you crying?" Grace asked, looking up from her cereal. "I'm not crying, just thinking." "About what?" How to explain this? How to tell an 8-year-old that sometimes trauma got turned into art, into education, into a thing that lived in a museum so other people could learn from it. Someone wants to put a chair in a museum, a chair that's important to me. Is it a magic chair? Rebecca almost laughed. Sort of. It's a chair that reminds people to be brave. Grace considered this. Like the paper bag dress? Exactly like that. Rebecca called Martha that night. "Did you get a letter from the museum?" "I did." Martha sounded tired. "I wasn't sure they'd contact you directly. I gave them your information but thought they might go through lawyers first." "You knew about this?" "They reached out to me 6 months ago, asked if I'd be willing to loan the chair. I said yes, but only if you approved." Rebecca sat on her bed, phone pressed to her ear, trying to process. "Why did you keep it?" "Because it mattered. Because someday someone would want to tell this story properly. And they'd need the actual chair, not just the video, not just the memory. I don't know if I want to participate. I've spent 6 years trying to move past this." Martha was quiet for a moment. "I understand. But Rebecca, you know how many women reach out to me after seeing the video? How many say it gave them courage to leave, to speak up, to press charges? Your story already helps people. This would just make it more official. Or it would keep me stuck in the worst moment of my life forever." "Maybe," Martha admitted. "Or maybe it transforms that moment into something that matters beyond just us, beyond just that night." Rebecca promised to think about it. She talked to Grace about it in the careful, age-appropriate way she'd learned from years of therapy. "Mama has to make a decision," Rebecca said during bedtime one night. "A museum wants to tell the story about how I got hurt. They want other people to learn from it. But I'm not sure if I want to remember that time or if I want to just keep moving forward." Grace thought about this with the seriousness she brought to all big questions. If people learn from it, that's good, right? Like how teacher reads us books about people who did brave things? Right. Then you should do it. Because you're brave and people should know. It sounded so simple when an 8-year-old said it. Rebecca called the museum the next week. "I'll participate, but I have conditions." The curator, a woman named Dr. Patricia Morrison, listened carefully. "I don't want this to be about revenge or punishment. I want it to be about survival, about the reality that justice is imperfect but necessary, about the cost of choosing truth over money. We can do that, and I want Elena's perspective included. She made a terrible choice, but she was also a victim. The exhibit should show that complexity." We've reached out to Miss Ross. She's agreed to participate as well. And one more thing, Rebecca took a breath. I want it clear that I turned down a $5 million settlement to be able to tell this story. I want people to understand that silence has a price tag, and sometimes you have to be broke to stay honest. Dr. Morrison was quiet, then, that's powerful. Yes, we'll include all of that. The exhibit opened 18 months later. Rebecca took the train to Washington with Grace, now 9 years old and finally tall enough to ride the adult height roller coasters she'd been obsessed with for years. They walked through the museum together. Grace held Rebecca's hand, unusually quiet. The chair sat in the center of a large room, spotlit under glass. It looked smaller than Rebecca remembered. More ordinary. Just a wooden chair with brass hardware and a small brass plaque. The plaque read, "This chair was kicked out from under Rebecca Hart on November 14, 2019, at the Waldorf Astoria Ballroom in New York City. She fell, she bled, she survived. The chair remained broken. She did not." Beneath the plaque was a child's handprint in yellow paint. Grace's handprint from when she was 6, made at the museum's request. A small label beside it read, "Grace, age sick for my mama." Grace stared at her own handprint, then at the chair, then at Rebecca. "That's the chair? That's the chair. It's just a chair. I know, but it's also important." Yes. They stood there for a long time. Other visitors moved through the exhibit, reading the wall text, watching video clips, listening to audio testimony. Some cried, some took photos, some stood silent, processing their own experiences reflected in Rebecca's story. The exhibit didn't shy away from complexity. It included Elena's testimony about being manipulated, included Grant's sentencing, included the appeals process, the reduced sentence, the denied parole. It included Rebecca's choice to refuse the settlement and what that choice had cost her. One section featured letters from women who'd contacted Rebecca over the years. "Your story gave me courage to leave. Because of you, I pressed charges. Seeing someone survive helped me believe I could survive too." Grace read every word. At one point she asked, "Mama, are you famous?" "No, baby, I'm just someone who had something bad happen and refused to stay quiet about it." "That sounds like famous to me." Rebecca smiled. "Maybe, but it's a different kind of famous. The kind where you don't get rich, you just get to tell the truth." They had lunch in the museum cafeteria after. Grace ordered mac and cheese. Rebecca ordered a salad she couldn't really afford, but got anyway because sometimes you needed to pretend you had your life together. "Mama?" Grace said around a mouthful of pasta. "Swallow first." Grace swallowed. "Are you going to tell me the whole story someday? About my dad and what happened?" Rebecca's heart clenched. "When you're older, when you're ready." "How will you know when I'm ready?" "I'll know, or you'll tell me." Grace considered this. "Okay, but I think I'm pretty ready now." "You're 9. Almost 10. Rebecca laughed despite herself. "Okay, almost 10. We'll talk about it more when you're almost 11. "Deal." They shook on it solemnly. On the train ride home, Grace fell asleep with her head on Rebecca's shoulder. Rebecca stared out the window at the landscape rushing past, thinking about the exhibit, about her handprint under glass, about the way trauma got transformed into education, if you were lucky enough to survive it with enough pieces intact to tell the story. She thought about Grant, still in prison, denied parole twice now. He'd be up for review again in 2 years. Would probably be denied again. The parole board's notes had been clear. No remorse, continued tendency to blame others, ongoing risk. He'd served most of his sentence, maybe all of it. And when he got out, Grace would be an adult, safe from custody battles, free to choose whether she wanted contact with him. Rebecca hoped she'd choose no, but it would be Grace's choice to make. She thought about Elena in Asheville, running her bakery, building a quiet life far from the glittering ballrooms where everything had gone wrong. Elena had sent flowers to the museum opening. The card had said simply, "Thank you for telling the truth." Rebecca had kept the card. She thought about Martha, who'd lost her career but gained something else. A clear conscience, maybe. The knowledge that she'd done the right thing even when it cost her. And she thought about herself. About the woman she'd been at 34, desperate and grateful and willing to trade her autonomy for security. About the woman she was now at 40, broke but free, tired but honest, surviving imperfectly, but surviving nonetheless. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, wasn't the fairy tale, but it was hers. And maybe that was enough. Grace turned 12 on a Tuesday in October. They celebrated at the apartment with a homemade cake and a few friends from school. Rebecca couldn't afford the roller skating party Grace had wanted, but they compromised on a movie and pizza. "This is better anyway," Grace said, blowing out candles. "More time to actually talk to people." Rebecca smiled. Her daughter was becoming diplomatic, learning to find joy in what was possible instead of mourning what wasn't. It was a skill Rebecca had learned late. She was glad Grace was learning it early. That night, after the friends left and the dishes were washed, Grace sat on the couch with the serious expression she wore when she had big questions. "Mama, I want to know about my dad now." Rebecca had been expecting this, had been preparing for it for years. She sat beside Grace, leaving space between them in case Grace needed distance. "Okay, what do you want to know?" "Everything." So Rebecca told her, not the sanitized version, not the child-safe summary, the real story, about the medical debt and the desperate marriage, about the manipulation and the affair and the gala, about the assault and the trial and the choice to refuse a settlement. She told Grace about the cancer and the NICU and the 4 months of fighting to stay alive while fighting to keep custody, about the shelter and the struggle and the slow, painful rebuilding. She told her about Elena and Martha and Sarah Mills and Dr. Bennett and all the people who'd helped along the way. And she told her about Grant, about his charm and his cruelty, about how he viewed people as disposable, about how he was still in prison and would be for years more. Grace listened without interrupting. When Rebecca finished, they sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Grace said, "Do you wish I'd never been born, since he's my father and everything?" "No, boy." Rebecca pulled Grace close. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You're the reason I survived, the reason I kept fighting. You are not your father. You are yourself, and yourself is extraordinary. But I have his DNA. You have mine too, and more importantly, you have your own choices. Biology isn't destiny, Grace. You get to decide who you become." Grace was quiet again. Then, "Are you scared of him? That he'll get out and try to hurt us?" Rebecca chose honesty over comfort. "Sometimes, but I'm more prepared now, and you'll be older. And he'll know that I won't stay silent, that there are people watching, that he can't get away with the things he used to get away with. Because of the museum, because of everything, because the story is told now, because people know." Grace nodded slowly. "Okay, thanks for telling me. Thanks for being ready to hear it." They watched a movie after that, some animated thing Grace had seen 3 times already. Rebecca didn't pay attention, just sat with her daughter, grateful for the ordinary moment after the extraordinary conversation. 2 years later, Grant's third parole hearing resulted in another denial. Rebecca didn't attend, didn't submit a statement, just waited for the notification in the mail. When it came, she read it once, then filed it away. Grace was 14 now, taking after Rebecca in some ways, compassionate, thoughtful, drawn to helping people, but also her own person, science-minded, pragmatic, with a dry sense of humor that surprised people. She asked occasionally about Grant, where he was, when he'd get out, but the questions weren't fearful anymore, just curious, like asking about a character in a story that had happened to someone else. In a way, it had. The woman Grant had hurt was so different from who Rebecca was now that it almost felt like reading about a stranger's life. Rebecca turned 45 the year Grace graduated high school. Grace had earned a full scholarship to a state university, biology major. She wanted to be a doctor. "I'm going to specialize in oncology," Grace told Rebecca over dinner one night. "Help people like you, the ones who survived the first time but need monitoring forever." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "That's a beautiful reason." "It's your reason. You just lived it. I'm going to study it." Rebecca had never been more proud. The year Grace started college, Rebecca received another letter from the museum. They were updating the exhibit. Would she be willing to record a follow-up interview? She agreed. The interview happened on a cold day in January. Rebecca sat in a small recording studio and answered questions about the 15 years since the assault, about Grace, about the work she still did as an advocate, about what survival looked like long-term. The interviewer, a young woman in her 20s, asked the question everyone always asked. Do you regret turning down the settlement? Rebecca had answered this question dozens of times, but she thought about it fresh, trying to give the honest answer instead of the practiced one. I regret how hard it's been financially. I regret not being able to give Grace some of the opportunities other kids had. I regret the stress and the uncertainty and the constant fear that one medical emergency would destroy us. She paused. But I don't regret being able to tell the truth. I don't regret Grace growing up knowing our mother chose honesty over money. And I don't regret the women who've reached out over the years saying the story helped them. That matters. It doesn't pay rent, but it matters. What would you say to someone facing a similar choice? I'd say there's no right answer. That choosing silence to survive is valid. That taking settlement money doesn't make you weak or a sellout. That sometimes survival requires compromise. Rebecca looked directly at the camera. But I'd also say that if you can afford to tell the truth, and afford is more than just money, it's emotional capacity and support systems and 1,000 other things. If you can afford it, telling the truth is its own kind of power, the kind money can't buy. The updated exhibit opened that spring. Rebecca attended with Grace, now 19 and home for summer break. The new section included Rebecca's interview, photos of Grace graduating high school, updates on Grant's continued incarceration. But it also included something else, a digital wall where visitors could share their own stories. Hundreds of testimonies from people who'd survived domestic violence, financial abuse, manipulation, people who'd chosen to speak, or chosen silence, or chosen something in between. Grace and Rebecca stood in front of the wall, reading story after story. Mama, Grace said quietly, you started something. I didn't start it. I just added my voice to something that was already happening. Still, Grace squeezed her hand. It matters. You matter. Grant Hayes was released from prison on a Wednesday morning when Grace was 23 and finishing medical school. He'd served 19 years of his sentence, multiple parole denials, finally granted release with strict conditions, monitored for life, prohibited from contacting Rebecca or Grace, required to attend therapy. Rebecca heard about it from Sarah Mills, who'd stayed in touch over the years. He's out, but he's been ordered to stay at least 500 miles away from you. If he violates that, he goes back immediately. Rebecca stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, feeling nothing, no fear, no anger, just a distant recognition that a chapter was finally closing. Thank you for letting me know. Are you okay? I'm fine. He's a middle-aged man with no money, no career, and no connections. He's not the threat he used to be. Still, be careful. Always. After they hung up, Rebecca called Grace. He's out. Grace was quiet for a moment. How do you feel? Tired, relieved it's over, ready to stop thinking about him. Do you think he'll try to contact me? I don't know. The court order says he can't, but men like him don't always follow rules. If he does, I'll tell him I don't want a relationship, that I grew up fine without him, that he's a stranger whose DNA I happen to share. Rebecca smiled despite the heaviness in her chest. You're stronger than I ever was at your age. I had a good teacher. 6 months after Grant's release, Rebecca received a message on Facebook from Cynthia Hayes, Grant's sister, a woman Rebecca had met once briefly at the wedding. I need you to know something. Grant died yesterday. Heart attack. He was alone in a motel room in Nevada. Rebecca read the message 3 times. Grant was dead, the man who'd tried to kill her, who'd orchestrated her assault, who'd laughed while she bled, who'd spent 19 years in prison and 6 months free before his own body gave out. Dead. She should have felt something. Relief, satisfaction, closure, something. Instead, she felt hollow, like finishing a book you'd been reading for so long, you'd forgotten why you started it. She called Grace. Your father died. Grace was silent. Then, okay, that's all? What else is there? He was a stranger. I'm sorry for the people who loved him, but I didn't. So yeah, okay. Rebecca admired her daughter's clarity, her refusal to perform grief she didn't feel. "You're allowed to feel complicated about it," Rebecca said gently. "I know, but I don't. Is that bad?" "No, honey, it's honest." After they hung up, Rebecca sat on her couch and cried. Not for Grant. For the woman she'd been at 34 who'd thought a man paying her debts meant he loved her. For all the years she'd spent afraid. For the version of herself who'd fallen in that ballroom and had to learn to stand back up. She cried for Elena, who'd wasted 13 years loving a man who'd viewed her as disposable. For Martha, who'd sacrificed her career for truth. For every woman who'd ever had to choose between safety and honesty. And she cried from relief. Because it was finally, actually, completely over. Rebecca returned to the museum one last time that fall. The chair was still there, still under glass, but they'd added a new plaque beside it. Grant Michael Hayes died on August 17, 2024. Rebecca Hart and her daughter Grace continue to advocate for survivors of domestic violence. The chair remains as a testament to survival, resilience, and the cost of choosing truth. Rebecca stood in front of it for a long time. Other visitors moved around her. Some paused to read. Some moved on quickly. Some stood as long as she did, recognizing something in the story that resonated with their own. A woman approached her, late 30s, cautious. "Excuse me, are you Rebecca Hart?" Rebecca nodded. "I just wanted to say thank you. I saw the exhibit 5 years ago. It gave me courage to leave. I've been free for 4 years now." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I have 2 daughters. They're safe because of you." Rebecca didn't know what to say. Thank you seemed wrong. She'd just survived. She hadn't saved anyone. But maybe that was enough. Maybe survival itself was a form of resistance, of hope, of proof that endings could be imperfect and still be endings. "I'm glad you're safe," Rebecca said. "That's what matters." The woman hugged her briefly, then walked away. Rebecca stayed a few more minutes, then she left the museum, walked out into the clear fall air, and pulled out her phone. Grace answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mama." "Hey, baby. I was thinking, want to come home for Thanksgiving?" "Obviously, do I get to bring anyone?" Rebecca smiled. Grace had been dating someone new, a kind person who made her laugh, who treated her well. "Always. I'll make the mac and cheese you love." "From scratch or from the box?" "From the box. You know I can't cook." Grace laughed. "Perfect. See you in a few weeks." Rebecca hung up and started walking toward the metro station. The city stretched around her, full of people making their own impossible choices, surviving their own traumas, building their own imperfect lives. She thought about the wooden chair under glass, about how it had been broken and had stayed broken, how she'd been broken too, but had healed in a way the chair couldn't. The healing wasn't complete, probably never would be, but it was enough to build a life on, enough to raise a daughter who knew her worth, enough to help other women find their way out of darkness. Rebecca descended into the metro station, swiped her card, and boarded a train heading north. Through the window, she watched the city blur past, all those buildings full of stories, some ending well, some ending badly, most ending somewhere in between, in that messy space where justice was incomplete, but life continued anyway. The train emerged from the tunnel into sunlight. Rebecca closed her eyes and felt the warmth on her face. She'd survived. Grace had thrived. And Grant Hayes, the man who'd tried to erase them both, was gone. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined when she'd worn that yellow dress to the gala 25 years ago. Wasn't the fairy tale. Wasn't complete justice. Wasn't even fully satisfying. But it was over, and sometimes that was the only ending that mattered.